My name is Clemmy Saxton. I live here at the hearth of Windermere, and I love to read. At the court of great King Arthur, who lived, as we all know, where knights were bold and the ladies were fair indeed, one of the most famous of men was the wizard Merlin. Never before or since was there such a wizard. All that was known of wizardry he knew, and his advice was always good and kindly. One day when Merlin was traveling disguised as a beggar, he happened on the house of an honest farmer and his wife, who, after giving him a hearty welcome, cheerfully offered him a big wooden bowl of fresh milk and some coarse brown bread on a wooden platter. Although the man and woman in the little cottage where they lived was neat and tidy, Merlin noticed that neither the husband nor the wife seemed very happy. When he asked them why, they said it was because they had no children. "If only I had a son, even if we're no bigger than my good man's thumb," said the poor woman, "we would be quite content." Now, this idea of a boy no bigger than a man's thumb so tickled Wizardry Merlin's fancy that he promised the man and his wife right away that such a son should come in due time to bring the good couple much happiness. He then went off at once to pay a visit to the Queen of Fairies, as Merlin felt that the little people would be best able to carry out his promise. And sure enough, the very idea of a little man who was no bigger than his father's thumb tickled the Fairy Queen too, and she set about the task at once. Soon the good couple was blessed with the tiniest of little boys. The parents were now very happy, and the christening of the little fellow took place with great ceremony. The Fairy Queen, attended by her company of elves, was present at the feast. She kissed the little child, and giving him the name of Tom Thumb, told the fairies to fetch the tailors of her court. She dressed her little godson exactly as she asked. His hat was made of a beautiful oak leaf, his shirt of fine spider's web, and his leggings and jackets were of thistledown. His stockings were made with rind of a delicate green apple, and the garters were two of the finest little hairs imaginable, plucked from his mother's eyebrow, and his shoes were made from the skin of a little mouse. When he was dressed in his new clothes, the Fairy Queen kissed him once more, and wishing him all good luck, flew off with the fairies of her court. As Tom grew older, he became very amusing and full of tricks, so his mother was afraid to let him out of her sight. One day, while she was making a batter pudding, Tom stood on the edge of the bowl with a lighted candle in his hand so that he might see that the pudding was properly made. Unfortunately, when her back was turned, Tom fell into the bowl, and his mother, not noticing he was missing, stirred him into the pudding. When she tried the pudding in a cloth and put it into a pot of boiling water, the batter filled Tom's mouth and prevented him from calling out. But he had no sooner felt the hot water than he kicked and struggled so much that the pudding jumped about in the pot. His mother, thinking the pudding was bewitched, was nearly frightened out of her wits. She pulled the bowl out of the pan, ran with it to her door, and gave it to a tinker who was passing by. The tinker was very grateful for the pudding and looked forward to having a better dinner than he had enjoyed for many days. But his pleasure did not last long, for as he was climbing over a fence, he happened to sneeze very hard, and Tom, who had been quiet inside the pudding for some time, called out at the top of his little voice, "Bless you!" This so terrified the tinker that he flung down the pudding and ran off as fast as he could. The bowl was broken in pieces, and Tom crept out with batter and ran home to his mother, who had been looking for him everywhere and was delighted to see him again. She gave him a bath in a cup, which soon washed off all the pudding, and he was none the worse for his adventure. A few days later, Tom and his mother went to the fields to milk the cows. And fearing Tom might be blown away by the wind, his mother tied him to a sow thistle with a little piece of thread. While she was milking it, a cow came by and blew off the thistle and the thread and Tom. Poor Tom. He did not like the cow's big teeth, and he called out loudly, "Mother, mother." "But where are you, Tommy, my dear?" "Tommy," cried his worried mother, wringing her hands. "Here, mother," shouted Tom, inside the red cow's mouth, and saying that, Tom began to kick and scratch until the poor cow was nearly mad. And he finally tumbled out of her mouth. The mother rushed to him, caught him in her arms, and carried him home safely. Some days later, Tom's father took him to the fields to plow and gave him a whip made of barley straw with which to drive the oxen, but little Tom was soon lost in a furrow. As usual, birds followed the plow that morning, looking for freshly unearthed grubs or any other kind of creatures to eat for breakfast. One happened to be a near-sighted hawk. Mistaking Tom for a plump toad, seized him and flew off over the treetops. It was only after Tom called out that the bird realized his mistake, and having no interest in making a meal of a boy, he let Tom fall. Below, a giant was getting some air on the roof of his castle. When Tom landed on his head, the giant raised his great hand, expecting to catch a pesky fly, but finding something that smelled like human flesh, one of his favorite meals, he simply dropped poor Tom into his mouth like a piece of candy. In a moment, the giant was sorry he had tried to make a snack of the new human. Tom kicked and scratched more wildly than he had in the mouth of the cow. With a mighty spit, the giant sent him flying again through the air, over the battlements and down into the sea. No sooner had he hit the water than a big fish swallowed him up. This very well may have been the end of Tom Thumb, but nearby fishermen caught the great fish and took it to the royal kitchen. Tom had to rest more than 100 times along the way, but after 2 days and 2 nights, he reached his father's house in safety. His mother ran to meet him, and there was great rejoicing at his arrival. He spent 3 happy days at home and set out again for the castle once more. One day, shortly after his return, Tom displeased the king, and fearing the royal anger, he crept into an empty flower pot where he lay for a long time. At last ventured Tom to peep out, and seeing a fine large butterfly on the ground nearby, he climbed out of his hiding place, jumped on its back, and was carried up into the air. The king and the nobles all tried to catch him, but at last poor Tom fell from his seat into a watering pot in which he had almost drowned. Luckily, the gardener's child saw him and pulled him out. The king was so pleased to have Tom safe once more that he forgot to scold him and made much of him instead. As a token of his fondness for the mischievous Tom, the king ordered the court tailor to make a wonderful little suit of clothes. The royal harness maker made a tiny saddle and bridle that was transformed into a castle mouse, into a miniature charger, and sewed with a needle from the queen's own sewing basket for his sword. Tom Thumb set forth in quest of another adventure. Afterward, Tom lived many years at the castle and became one of the best beloved of King Arthur's knights. The end.